Good morning. Hemshech Beis, Volume 2. We finished the paragraph at the bottom of page, close to the bottom of page 1173. And what did we learn yesterday? We learned that Malchus, and here we're discussing Malchus of Ein Sof, what he calls the Machshava of Ano Emlech, the Machshava of the Eibishter of Ano Emlech, I shall rule, I shall be a Melech. And we explained Melech is not about rulership and ownership or control or authority, but it's a relationship between a Melech and a Am. So obviously, when you talk about the Eibishter and the people, as much as they have a relationship, one is God and one is not. That's why we refer to the Eibishter as a Melech, because he's a superior and a higher entity than we are. Shalei Berech. But Malchus itself is like an interface, because on one hand, Malchus is what he called Yerid Gdela Lefan of his Baruch. Later he used the word also Hashpala. Became Dulase Shama Tameitse Anva Sanuse. The bottom of page 1172. Anova Vashpala Gdela, that's where it says Lefnei Kovid Anova. So the idea of being a melech from an entity that is completely beyond is even more than the distance between a human being and a zvuv, an insect, a fly, an insect. So where's Shach Melech? So therefore, Malchus on one hand is not Atzmus Mamish, it's already relating to an Am. On the other hand, it is a melech. Melech ha'elam. Melech kol ha'aretz. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'elam. He's the melech. So we have a godly dimension, but it's not the essence of God. It's a God that relates to existence. The godliness that relates to existence. So he explained that there's two levels talking in Malchus. There's Hisnasus Atzmis, which essentially means he's just unique and different on his own, without comparison, doesn't need anything, doesn't need to be recognized. It's not in relationship with another. Earlier, it seems like the level of Heid Malchus. What he said earlier, the Melech as he is, Beichale Pnima, Al Kise Malchuse. That level. Even though you could argue that there's even a level higher than that, which is apparent as well. And then there's how Malchus relates Hisnasus ala Am. Hisnasus Atzmis, Hisnasus ala Am. That's the contrast. And that's where Machshava of Ano Emlech, that's the level. Whereas Ano Emlech, HaMelech ala Am. What's the Am here? There's no nation yet. There's no nifred, actual nifred, because Am always means a separate entity, another entity, Azulas. So he says that is what the Machshava Ano Emlech creates the Sherish Shemokir for his Savas HaElemis VaHanivroim. Because the Elemis and Nivroim that will emerge and be created after the Tzimtzum is the Am in the language of Melech and Am. So Lifnei Tzimtzum, you already have that beginning of that relationship, because the Eibush is thinking about it. However, we explain thinking in the levels before the Tzimtzum. So there's no active existence yet, but within the divine consciousness, as we call it, Ein Sof, you have Ein Sof HaShayach, like he said when he spoke about Shemo, it's already Shayach LeElemis. The Eir, that is. Now, in breaking that down further, he brought the Zohar. The Zohar, Beis Menusa de Malka Goliv Galifu B'Tehiri Allah, and literally explained every word. Beis Menusa first starts with Tehiri Allah. Tehiri Allah, he says, is the level of Machshava of Ano Emlech. That's the level of Tehiri Allah. That's how he begins. Machshava Achas Haklolish and the Samtzim Me'eretz Mas. So in other words, Tehiri Allah is like the lowest level of Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. That's already not in its root. That's already actively considering and actively thinking. Machshava Achas, he calls it, that encompasses everything. That's Nesamtzim Atzmus Ein Sof. It's no longer the being beyond an artist or the artist that envisions all possibilities. It's a particular Machshava. V'hiya Machshava D'Ano Emlech. Okay, so in this Tehiri Allah, he's going to explain. Bereisha Hurmanusa de Malka is explaining where did this Machshava come from? So he says, Bereshum and Hurman the Malchus, Menusa the Malkin, the Rishus and the Ratzon of the Melech, of which part? The Hisnasus Atzmis, what he calls Adnusei Memshalte Atzmi. There's a Rishus and Ratzon that from there was drawn into Tehirei Law, this Machshava V'Ano Emlech. So that means Beresh Menusa de Malka. He's talking about Beresh, not the actual desire, thought and of Ano Emlech, but the Beresh, the beginning of the Hurman. It all begins with the Rishus and Ratzon that comes from the higher level. So here we have two levels now. Tehirei Law is Machshava V'Ano Emlech, which is the last level before it actually will become the Tzimtzum and then will come Malchus of Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum and the Kav and everything and so on. And you have the root of it is the Rishus and Ratzon, which he calls Mekeme. Baruch Kved Hashem Mekeme. Kved Hashem is Ratzon of Ano Emlech, Malchus of Ein Sof. The Rishus and Ratzon is coming from Mekeme, the root of source of that, Mekede, which is an Hisnasus Atzmis. So from Hisnasus Atzmis comes Hisnasus ala Elamus. That's what he says here. Okay. What about Golav Galifu? What's the chikika here? What's being engraved into Tehirei Law when this Ratzon and Rishus, this Rishus and Rishus, is drawing down that from God, the godliness, the divine Ein Sof that's beyond existence. From there, meaning it's Hisnasus Atzmis. He's just talking about God's presence as being something beyond anything, not in relation to another, just fundamentally Hisnasus Atzmis. Says what happens, what the active process. So something happens in Tehirei Law, a type of chikika, a type of engraving. Now, actually, this is not physical engraving, it's not spiritual engraving. It just means that an image emerges. And what is that? That's the Shir Atzmei B'Keach. That's the envisioning. So you could break it down to say that there's in the Ratzon and Machshava that I will rule. In the Machshava of creation, you could have the actual thing that I want a relationship with existence. A Melech wants to relate with the Am. And the Am, in a sense, the Rev Am Hadras Melech. You have the Hadras Melech, the Melech relating to them. Yes, he's beyond them and above them, but it's a relationship as distant as it may be, it's a relationship. That itself has more than that. It's not just a relationship, he's actually envisioning. That's the Shir Atzmei B'Keach, he says. So if you want to spell it out more, you could say the king is envisioning the nation that he will have. Not just that he wants a relationship with them, he's actually envisioning. That's what we call Hashara B'Keach. In this case, it's more than envisioning because the Eibusha is actually preparing, so to speak, and allocating the resources for creating this existence. That will be this Am. Remember, the Am doesn't have, it's true, it's an independent reality, but it's created by God at the end of the day. It's not self-made, God forbid. So God is preparing, in other words, like we spoke about the artist, preparing the specifics of what this nation is going to look like. Basically the 10 spheres, or in the words of the artist, envisioning the image, and the same thing here, the person who's building the home. Not just that he is now actively desiring, as we spoke, not just in concept and in theory, he's actively engaged in building a home, but he's also defining and spelling out the Hashara B'Keach. Sometimes the Lashon is Shir Atzmei B'Keach, Kol Masha She'asid Liyas B'Peil. Here the language is that Shir Atzmei Hashara B'Keach, the Chol Ha'elim Zo Yishtalshlus. And that's now also the reason it says twice Golav Galifu. Because since the existence is not one dimension, it's two general dimensions, the hidden worlds and the concealed. So he says, which is Machshava and Dibur, that in this Machshava itself, that he's envisioning all of existence, there's also a Machshava Sheba Machshava and a Dibur Sheba Machshava. Almid Diskasi comes from the Machshava part, the thought, which is concealed, because the thought is always concealed. And there's also the Dibur part, which will ultimately be expressed in the Asar Mamoris. He Beresh his body, he air, etc. So he says, Golglifa Beis Chikika Skikach Behelam Machshava V'Chikika L'Chikika. Chikika L'Chikika most likely means in the engraving, in imagining, in envisioning, I should say, the thought of the envisioning in your thought, you're also envisioning the expressive and the worlds that will be revealed. It's like a person who's thinking, he's thinking the idea, but then he's also thinking how he's going to express the idea in words. So there's two levels of envisioning here. In this level of machshava is everything is encompassed. The general thought of a relationship between a melech and a am, and the specifics of the Goluf Galifu. And then he concludes to explain Baruch Kved Hashem. And that's what Baruch Kved Hashem Imkemi. I'll just read the last three lines. Baruch Kved Hashem Imkemi. What is that? Baruch Kved Hashem Imkemi. That God's covered that Kved Hashem, Baruch Imkemi, should be blessed from its place. As he asked the question back the beginning on bottom of page 1170, that the answer is Kved Hashem is Malchus of, let me read it inside. Lahamshich b'bchinas Hisnasus Atzmis lies b'chinas Hisnasus Alam. Kved Hashem is Hisnasus Alam. His exaltedness, his leadership over a nation, over the nation. And the Baruch is Hamshache, Baruch from the word Hamshache, Baruch of Hamshache. From where? From Mekayme, from Hisnasus Atzmis. The Beis from Menusa de Malka, from which they're drawn down into Malchus, Machshava Vana Emlech of Tehiri Elah. And then the parentheses, he just qualifies because we say Baruch Kved Hashem Imkemi. According to this is God is doing the Baruch Kved Hashem Imkemi. There's no one else around. It's all before the Tzimtzum. So he's explaining the fact is the Eifanim, the Malachim say this because the Kavanah is to draw down aware that it becomes revealed even Lamato. Since we want this to be revealed, this transition or this journey even from Hisnasus Atzmis to Hisnasus Ala'am, that's before the Tzimtzum, you want to draw it all the way down, to be a real Gili, not just in God's consciousness. In actuality, so he's saying that they find him say this, not just to remain before the Tzimtzum. You want this, that's why we say it every day. In the name of the Malachim who say it, the Eifanim that say it. So that just qualifies and explains that these levels are not just remain above, they actually relate to us right here. So as we, in our existence, we're constantly focusing on, basically the Kavanah, when you say Baruch Kved Hashem Imkemi, would be, you're focusing on how the divine that's beyond existence is being drawn into the divine that relates to existence, which, if you may recall earlier, is actually the Ayin of the Yesh HaAmiti being drawn to the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. He doesn't say that explicitly here because here he's talking the Primis HaKav, Chetzenius HaKav. But it's the same idea. Okay. So this shouldn't surprise anyone because if you think about it now in context, this is the theme of all Ayin Beis. How does the divine that's beyond us connect to us, which is, so we have two levels, even before the Tzimtzum, even in the divine consciousness, Lifnat Tzimtzum, you have, so to speak, two levels. But again, I always qualify, it's not actual levels, because that's all within Ein Sof HaPoshet. But something, so to speak, something is there. The word something is a very vague word. The Rebbe explains in the letter of Tafshin Tes that either we speak that relative to the higher levels, there's levels. But relative to the lower levels, it's all pshitas because till the Tzimtzum, there is no existence. Nothing can emerge yet. So it's all within, so to speak, the divine consciousness. And then the Rebbe says that it also could mean that all the levels that we talk about after the Tzimtzum that relate there, Lifnat Tzimtzum, it's all Elikus. Remember, even the Ratzon Ano Emlech is not distant from the Hisnasus Atzmis more than the Hisnasus Atzmis is from Atzmus. This is Atzmus choosing all these dimensions. Remember, when you go all the way to the source, all the tracks, whether it's Lamaila Aden Ketz or Lamatamata Aden Tachlis, or the root of Bligvul or Gvul, or what we're talking about here, the Ratzon Klali and the Ratzon Prati, in Lifnat Tzimtzum, it's all part of one divine energy. When you speak about once existence begins, then you could say, oh, now I see that there are different dimensions. But there's a place where all this becomes part of one picture. In Atzmus, actually, it's all the Hisnasus Atzmis, which in generally has no distinction. It's God's capacity to do whatever he wants to do. But remember, again, the Eibishter wants a structured existence, and he wants it to make sense to some level. So he gives us these stepping stones of how things process, which also is the way we're created. It's the same thing with us. You begin with a level that's far more closer to you when you have a relationship with another, a true healthy relationship. And I'm just applying this to a personal relationship, let's say a marriage or another friendship or any type of relationship. That what you have is also there's you as you are in your own. You spend 20 or whatever amount of years living your own life. Then comes the point where you get married and you start having a relationship with another. So what's happening? The relationship with yourself, the way you are on your own, is now beginning to manifest and connect to another. Now, in the healthiest scenario, you want them both to speak to each other. It's not like two different personalities. You know, that my own private life is my private life and nobody else knows about it. And the relationship I have with my spouse or with anyone else is another part of me. You don't want it to be that way. You want as much as possible your inner self to come into the relationship that you're communicating with another. But at the end of the day, everybody ultimately has a certain inner self that can't fully be communicated. So there's different ways of communicating. It's not always through words. There's other ways that people connect with each other. My point is that not exactly as it is lifnei tzimtzum with Elikus, which is Hisnasus Atzmis in the purest form, but we all have an element of self and an element of that self relating to another. So if you really think about it, it's two stages. You make a choice that you're going to move from the inner self to connect to another. And this is either machshava and dibur in a smaller scale is that when you're thinking on your own, then you choose, I want to communicate what I'm thinking. Or even deeper, levels that are even beyond machshava, that are within your own inner psyche, and even levels that you yourself may not be aware of. Remember, we learned earlier that in the higher levels, there's not even awareness to self, let alone to another. So just to make this a little more practical and applicable, that we also have these dimensions, can move in a poshet. It's obvious that it's not on these levels. We're talking here the highest levels in beyond the shtalshus, before the tzimtzum, but we have something we can talk about. And we could apply it, and we can find examples. And not only that, you can actually use it to help people and help yourself build your relationship. Because you could say, some people have a very superficial relationship, which means it's only like the connection they have, but they don't bring the depth of their own self into it. And other people, the other extreme. The self always remains a lonely place and never really communicates. There are people I speak to, and they say, no, I never really express myself, even to my closest people, even to my wife or to my husband. And then there's the other way around, as I said, that people just communicate as superficial and they don't bring that deeper self, or they have the deep self and it's not expressed. So the key is to bridge the two ultimately, because like he said in the parentheses, it should become your etzem should become revealed begoli, and for that you need these different stages and steps. I can elaborate more if necessary, but I think tan lechachem v'yech kameid. If anybody has questions or anything you'd like me to clarify, please, before I continue next paragraph. Okay.
It sounds like the two levels, grif grifu, or that source of the in relationship is that deeper part of the relationship and the more revealed part of the relationship. It seems to be that both are available for the person to give over. In other words, he doesn't have to touch his before tzimtzum level to be able to reveal his deeper part of himself.
Well, in Inyan, before you speak to another, let's say, and you convey anything, first you have to speak to yourself. In other words, yes, we don't always think of it in steps like that, but if you really dissect it, the anatomy of this process, absolutely. Within yourself. Let's just talk on a basic level. Let's not even talk about deep love or deep intimacy or anything like that. Let's just talk about a teacher and a student. If a teacher does not prepare himself, firstly, to want to be a teacher, like in this case, Aratzen and Rishus, to move from his own inner sanctum, from his own inner brilliance to become a teacher, so obviously you don't have that happening. So he needs to have that Ratzen, that now he's going to relate to a student. Then he needs to prepare himself. They said take an idea or whatever he's going to teach and break it down to things that he's going to reveal very explicitly, things that he's going to communicate, things that are going to remain somewhat concealed and above the head of the student, let's say, just as an example. So before there's, like we've learned, before there's dibur, there's machshava sheba machshava, there's dibur sheba machshava, all within yourself. And then there's machshava sheba dibur and dibur sheba dibur. And that's how the relationship develops. So in a very healthy flow, what's happening is from the inner intelligence, the deepest ideas of the teacher is flowing first to his more expressive parts within the teacher. And then from there, it goes to the student on all the levels necessary. So basically, if you want to go back to the Lashon, yesh, ayin, yesh. And the ayin itself breaks into two parts. One that relates more to the teacher, one that relates more to the student, the mashpia, makabel. Yeah.
Sure. Nice.
Well, basically, and then, of course, once the tzimtzum happens, which is the actual process, these stages that are pre-tzimtzum are going to become more manifest. In other words, let's say the pnimius hakava, chitzenius hakava are going to reflect these two levels. Pnimius hakava, as we're going to learn, is going to reflect the inner teferes hanelam, like a Hisnasus Atzmis, and the chitzenius hakava is going to reflect more Malchus of Ein Sof, which is Hisnasus Ala'am, in its root. So everything begins in the root. You begin the subtle differences, and then when it begins to emerge and manifest in a concrete way, you're going to have actually different tracks. You're going to have Eidus and Kalim are going to emerge at some point. No, Eidus and Kalim from Bli Gvul and Gvul, Makif and Pnimi, and all the other levels that will develop through Hishdalshlus. Yeah.
Okay. In other words, the Tiferes and Neram has a relationship with the Hisnasus Atzmis, Kavod Malchus.
He doesn't say it yet, but I think he's going to say it. And if not, it's pretty obvious from the flow here. That's what it looks like. He didn't say it explicitly. I would wait till we finish the next page because he hasn't yet tied it all together. Remember, we still have to cover, which we're going to do now, Hayahu Shmei Bilvad. Remember, if you go back to, just keep the flow in mind. On page 1170, after he finished about the two levels of the Kav, he said, Ubir Ayin, to explain this, these words are very vital because the Rebbe Rashab is telling us, he's explaining now the inner and the outer dimension. Let's go to Baruch Kvod Hashem Imkemei. To understand that, we need Hayahu Shmei Bilvad. So now we're going to go back to Hayahu Shmei Bilvad, and we're going to understand the whole picture. And it looks like he's going to tie it up in the next page or two. Yeah, that's what it seems like. Okay. So now we go back to the issue of Hayahu Shmei Bilvad. Remember, there's a looming question here, a hanging question called, what is Shmoi when there's no Zulas? Hayu Actualize Nivra Elam means Lifnei Atzimtzum, Lifnei Ha'elam, before there's existence. So what is Shmoi before existence? Now, I know we could all guess and speculate, but there's no need. The Rebbe Rashab is going to tell us now. So here's what he says. Ubezeh Yuvan, and with this we'll understand. Masha Imrim, or Masha Omar, Actualize Nivra Elam, Hayahu Shmei Bilvad. That prior to creation, until creation, so to speak, was he and Shmei Bilvad. Just to refresh our memory, at the top of page 1171, he said, Hoyer Shmei was Etzem Ha'er and Hispashtus Ha'er. And then Hispashtus said there were two levels, Er La'atzmei, Er L'Zulasei. So the top of page 1171. Just pointing it out because I want to see if he's going to use that or he's going to use different words. We'll see in a minute. Shmei, he says now, he's using the language that we just learned. Shmoi hu koyach hamachshava hamiyuchid imoy. Remember we said machshava and koyach hamachshava. At the top of 1173, in explaining these two levels, he said, b'psori echza, there's thought, an active thought, and there's the power, hayuli, the power to have all thoughts. What he called the mechzav, he called the moker chetzvei. And later he said the word moker mechzav shal b'chinas machshava. That's the koyach hamachshava. So he says now, shmoi is the level of koyach hamachshava hamiyuchad imoy. Remember we said that was all kolol by the Adam, by the human, is kol be'etzem nefesh. He called it klula u'miyechedes benafshe, and by the Eibishter, he called it Hisnasus Atzmis Ein Sof. I'm just reading from the top of the same page here. This is the level of Hisnasus Atzmis.
Ein adayin giloi machshava klal, he said on top of the page.
Yeah. So now he's saying this level of Shemo is the machshava that's miyuchedes imoy, hamiyuched imoy. This is the source, the mekeme. This is the same level as Baruch Kved Hashem, mimkeme. That's Shemo. The source for where the hamshach of machshava of an emlech, which is Kved Hashem, that's already Malchus of Ein Sof, the Malchus that relates to the Am. So now he's teaching like this. What means Actualize Nivra Elam? So the pastors we teach Actualize Nivra Elam until the world Bria is created, which means after the Tzimtzum. So he says no. The Kedem Shen is Galab Mechinas Machshava Zu. Meaning before the Machshava, which Machshava? Of Ano Emlech. So Actualize Nivra Elam means Kedem that God thought about the world, meaning in a relationship with the world. Machshava da Ano Emlech, the lower level. Zeu Actualize Nivra Elam. That means Actualize Nivra Elam, meaning before God actively, the Hamshacha, that became an actual thought, that Ano Emlech, which is the Hisnasus Am, yes, before the creation, but it's creating already and envisioning and creating the root and source of existence. That means Actualize Nivra Elam. Hayahu Shmei Levad. That was him and his Shmei. He didn't yet explain what who is. He explained Shmei. Shezeu b'chinas koyach hamachshava. So he's repeating, that's the koyach hamachshava, from which came the machshava of Ano Emlech shenivra elam. So actually nivra elam is before that, prior to that, is this level of koyach hamachshava. Hainu b'chinas Hisnasus Atzmi. This is the level of Hisnasus Atzmi, the fundamental, essential core greatness or exaltedness. That's encompassed and united with Atzmus Ein Sof because it has not yet emerged in any relationship. It's all within the core of Ein Sof. Lifnei Tzimtzum has not yet in any way turned into a relationship or even God thinking of a relationship. So that's what's called Kol Miyuchad Ba'atzmus Ein Sof. So it's the higher levels of Ein Sof in Lifnei Tzimtzum. I don't want to guess, but because I see he's still in the middle of the subject, but it's hard to resist. I'll just say it sounds to me that Machshava no Emlech would be in the Hisnasus Se'er Hashayach Lezulas, and Shmoi is Hisnasus Se'er K'may Shehu La'atzmei.
Yeah,
that's what it sounds like, but not necessarily.
Yeah,
not necessarily because he said earlier that who is Etzem Ha'er. And Shemo, he said, was his Hisnasus Ha'er, but K'may Shehu La'atzmei. So it could be it's that, or it could be it's even higher. Just keep that in mind. I don't want to say anything conclusively. We'll talk about it, obviously, as we go forward. Let's continue what he's going to say now.
He said that this is Meyuchot Boy. He said that this is Meyuchot Boy. Probably this is the highest. Beside Tzmosoi.
Well, I don't think he's contradicting, but it's Shemoy not who. Remember that.
Hoya who ushmoy.
So look on the top of page 1171. Okay, so let's continue now. Valzen Emar. Kinizgav Shmei Levade. Heidu Aloretz. Okay. Kinizgav Shmei Levade. That his name alone is Nizgav, is uplifted, is above. Why does he bring Heidu Aloretz?
Only Hoidoi is Aloretz Shemoyim.
Okay, right. Only Hoidoi, meaning his reflection is Anoretz. But his Shema is Nizgav, yeah, Nizgav Shema Levade. Which Shema is this referring to? He says the B'china Shema Hanal, who Nizgav Umarumam, B'chinas Havdalam Ha'elamis. That this level of Shema is Nizgav, is lifted up, Umarumam, and exalted and higher. The B'chinas Havdalah, removed, in a state of being removed from, separate. Ma'elamis, from the worlds. So that's the word. It's not how Elikus, Haydei, ala Oretz, that's reflected and relates to the existence. It's Nizgar Shmei Levade. Well, it's a little like Hoyahu Shmei Bilvad, like the word Bilvad. It's a unique state that's above and beyond existence. Shaharizeu B'chinas, turning the page 1174. So Harizeu B'chinas is Hisnasus Atzmis canal. Does he mean Atzmei or Atzmi? Before he used the word Atzmi, but Atzmei could also mean Hisnasus Atzmei, meaning his essential, his Atzmei. It's
the same thing, Phil.
Yeah, the Teichen is the same. It's not Hisnasus Ala'am, it's Hisnasus Atzmei, meaning his own inner Hisnasus. Canal. So there we go. So again, Shmoi is the level of Hisnasus Atzmi or Atzmei, the level of Koyach HaMachshava. It's miyuchedes and klulo miyuchedes with Atzmus Ein Sof, and it's bottom line the level that's not as the air relates to the am or existence. Rak Heidei, the Ziv, only his reflection. Well, Heidei and Ziv is really synonymous. You could say Heidei could be his glory. His beauty.
Zivoi, so Shmoi.
Heidei v'Ziv means. You could say it's his beauty, his reflection. Bottom line, it's not the Shmoi Levad, it's already an expressive part of it. Only that shall Shmoi. And that was Heidei v'Ziv shall Shmoi shazel b'chinas hamachshava dena emlech. That's the machshava, that's the lower level. Machshava na emlech and tehir elah. Hu al eretz v'shamayim. That relates to, and that shines, and basically is expressed on Eretz V'Shamayim, because it relates to Eretz V'Shamayim, to earth and heaven. So here you have Shmoi and the reflection of Shmoi. Even though we know Shmoi is also a reflection, but in this context, Shmoi is referring to Shmoi Bilvad, Nizgav Shmoi Levade. Okay. So he just added, what was added in the last few lines was a little more meat to the subject, and also in the expression we say in davening Nizgav Shmei Levade and Heidei al Oretz. Okay, v'hainu. This means the b'chinas Malchus shalifnei atzimtzum. The Malchus pre-tzimtzum Malchus, which we called before Malchus of Ein Sof, or what's called Machshava of Emlech. We're talking about the thought, not the power of the thought, not Mekeme, not the way it is in Shmoi. Malchus shalifnei atzimtzum hine b'china zu shehi the b'china shaychus al elmis, which is already a relating to the elmis, obviously not actually relating, but within, again, in Ein Sof, it's the melech as he's considering, as he's relating to Ano Emlech to be a melech ala am, snasus ala am, not a snasus atzmis. Says b'china zu b'china shaychus al elmis. He b'chinas ha'ara levad, b'chinas koyach hamachshava atzmi. So based on the fact that he just said Heidei v'Zivei, so clearly this level is only ha'ara, only a reflection, even lifnei atzimtzum, b'chinas koyach hamachshava ha'atzmi, from the power of thought, or what he called before Hisnasus Atzmis, the core power of thought that is within and connected within the etzem of Ein Sof. So this, of course, explains what he said. Remember that Maluch is a Hashpala Gdela, because God is beyond all of existence. So what's happening here? So that's why you need Baruch Kved Hashem Imkeme, because from this beyond, you need now a reflection. So Malchus of Ein Sof is defining as a reflection. This Malchus, Lifnei Atzimtzum, is a reflection of the higher level, what we're calling Shmoi, or Koyach HaMachshava, or Hisnasus Atzmis, just making sure we have the picture. So Tehillah law is a ha'ara, a reflection of the higher level. Okay, now he's bringing it back. Let me just refresh your memory. If you remember, he mentioned Be'er Chanir Eir back on page 1169. So if you recall, when he started speaking about the Kav, this is important before I read on. So he said, there's the Primis HaKav, Chetzenius HaKav. So he said the following. I'm just reading on page 1169, two-thirds down. That why was there a tzimtzum in the Eir, Lifnei tzimtzum, even though the Kav originates there? Because you need the Kav to be commensurate. You need the Kav to be commensurate and relate to existence. I'm reading from there on page 1169. In your light, neither appears light. In your light, neither appears light. So what's Eircha and Eir? So he said there, the Be'ercha, the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, in the Eir of the Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, Shagam Zeu Rak Ha'ara Levad, K'mo She'izbar B'Samuch. Now we're getting to the B'Samuch. This is what he's explaining. That also, which is also only Ha'ara. So it's also only Eir. Eircha, in the Ha'ara, Nira Eir, Hagili Hakav L'Acharat Tzimtzum. That's what he's saying. Now he's going back and explaining what we learned in the beginning of the Maimon. Now that we've established that Lifnei Tzimtzum, there's also a level that's called Ha'ara. I know you could ask the question, and what do you mean? And the higher levels of Eir is not Ha'ara. Leave that for right now. In
Machshava miyuchades, he said.
Malchus of Ein Sof, Malchus, Ano Emlech, is a Ha'ara of Shemo. So now he says, V'zeu she'imrim, v'alzeh imrim. But Eir Chanira Eir, he's going now down after the Tzimtzum. The Eir Chanira Eir, the Mebchinas Ha'ara, the Malchus, the Ein Sof. Means Eircha, the first Eircha is the Ha'ara, the reflection of Malchus of Ein Sof, which is only a reflection of Shemo, which is Hisnasus Atzmis and Koyach HaMachshava HaAtzmi. In that Ha'ara, Malchus of Ein Sof, who Shanira Eir, that's where appears an Eir, La'acharat Tzimtzum, Be'er HaKav, in the Eir of the Kav. So the Kav, which is rooted in Malchus of Ein Sof, as we learned, is basically Ha'ara of a Ha'ara. That's Ba'ercha Nira Eir. In Eircha of Lifnei Tzimtzum, of Malchus of Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, which is Eircha and Ha'ara, Nira Eir, the Eir La'acharat Tzimtzum, emerges Eir, B'chinas HaKav, Shuzeh B'chinas Ha'ara, the Ha'ara Levad. So the Kav is Ha'ara D'Ha'ara, and if you remember, clearly Ha'ara D'Ha'ara is always the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. Ha'ara is Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, we learned earlier. He didn't spell that out yet, but I'm just pointing out what things we learned a bit earlier. And due to this, and because of this, the general, the Eir HaKav, the light of the Kav, of the ray, of the line, the thread of light in general, hu b'chinas ayin shel hayesh. Oh, he says it now explicitly. And due to this, the Kav in general is the ayin of the yesh. Because it's not reflecting Hisnasus Atzmis, how things are from God's perspective. It's reflecting how God is relating to existence. Liyes memenu isavas elmis, being that from the Kav comes the creation of the worlds, and that originates from Malchus of Ein Sof, where in the Lifnei Tzimtzum, God is envisioning the worlds. It's Malchus Melech Ha'am. So, Liyes memenu isavas elmis, b'tchilas eishtalshus. Because from it will come the creation of the worlds, from the beginning, the beginning of Ishtalshus, which is what? Ak, Adam, Habriya, the Briya, the Klolos. Remember, Ak is the first world called Briya in macrocosm. So that's the first world that's created from Kav. The Kav is the first world will be Ak. He doesn't use the word ak here. He just says bria de klolos. But we learned it earlier that ak is machshava, if you remember, was also machshava. But that's already a machshava that's like an outline of existence itself. We learned about Malchus of Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum is makefes v'seveves. It's like a hovering energy of the artist as he's about to create. The kav is the general force that draws the energy from before the Tzimtzum. We just explained which level, Malchus of Ein Sof. We're talking obviously Chitzeni Sakav now. And that draws it down. And that's why, in general, the kav is the ayin of the yesh.
Is machshava dana emlech atzilus the chlolus?
Atzilus the close is generally the Esses Firis Agnuzus. So it's not necessarily only Malchus of Ein Sof. I have to look it up. Maybe it's some Maimonim, it may be Machshava no Emlech, correct? Or maybe it could be also, I don't know if it's Shmoi, but it may also be all the Esses Firis Agnuzus. And remember, in Inyan, there's also a concept like we spoke about, Tiferes Hanelam. So Tiferes Hanelam in the 10 hidden spheres sounds to me like a part of an Atzilus. However, it's Atzilus the Klolos. And Tiferes Hanelam goes to Keser. So I think that Atzilus the Klolos may be more than just Malchus of Ein Sof. It could be in some places, it may be just that lowest level, but I think it's the whole, I don't say structure, but everything that is being envisioned. But I may be wrong because now I'm thinking about it. 1 second, I may think about it differently. Because according to this Maimer, Shiur Atzmei B'Keach, which is the envisioning of existence, is in Tehirei law. Golif Galifu b'Tehirei law.
Which is ano emlech, the lower.
Which is ano emlech, correct. So it could be that based on here, it may be that it's all, it's not 100% clear. But my understanding from different Maimonim, I'd have to really research it again because I don't remember exactly. I think in different Maimonim there's different mashmoyos. Where that Atzilus the Klolos is all the levels of Eir Lifnei Tzimtzum. I don't mean all the way Etzem Eir necessarily. I mean in the levels that we're talking about, Ratzon Kodim, Ratzon Kloli, or is it only
Even
concentrated in Malchus of Ein Sof?
Even Shmoi?
Huh?
Even Shmoi?
Shmoi is clearly higher than Malchus of Ein Sof. That's clear here.
No, but
Hisnasus Atzmis.
the chlolus possible at Shmoi?
I don't think Atzilus the Klolos is Shmoi. No, it sounds like Shmoi is because Koyach HaMachshava. It sounds like it's before there's a Netzal even.
Is the Tiferes Hanelam Shmoi maybe?
You know what? He didn't finish. Let's see. Let's see what he says. And let's see firstly if it's clear. If not, we can then speculate. I don't want to speculate before reading. Let me read further. Let's see inside.
Could I ask you one more question? Hoyahu Shmoi Bilvad. Shmoi is take machshava miyuchedes, but could you say Hisnasus Atzmis koidem shenivra ha'olam be'atzmusoi? This is a Shmoi.
What's the shaila? Hisnasus Atzmis is dafka koidem shenivra elam.
I understand, but atzmusoi is higher than Hisnasus Atzmis. No.
First of all, where does he say? He says Hisnasus Atzmis be'atzmusoi shala eir. We're not talking about Atzmus now.
No, it said how could you say ushmoi? Shmoi is already something with the oilam, no?
So he's saying shmoi here is not necessary. Shmoi is Hisnasus Atzmis. You mean he's asking? You mean the question of zulas, that shmoi is shaykh to zulas? So I would also let's see what he says. If he doesn't specifically state it, I can give you an answer right now. But I'd rather read inside and let's see. I hear what you're saying. He's definitely teaching Shmoi that Shmoi is about Hisnasus Atzmi. The reason it's Shmoi, let's be honest, is because even Hisnasus Atzmi is already something outside of Atzmus, but outside of who even. But let's not go there. Let me continue reading. Let's see what he says, and let's see if anything is left unclear. Okay? A little patience. Savlanut. Since Atzmus has so much patience with us and creates all these levels, let's all have a little patience with him, and we'll get the picture as close as possible. Okay.
He is having patience with us.
Yeah. Okay. Umishum zeh b'chinas erika b'chal b'chinas ayin shala yesh. Lias memeni savasel b'chilas hashtalshus. Let me continue the niggin here. So being that it's because from the kav, comes the creation of the worlds, bringing it to b'chilas hashtalshus, in the beginning of hashtalshus, b'chinas adam the bria, the klolus. In the beginning of hashtalshus, it's adam the bria. This is expression in Chassidus, based on Kabbalah, Adam the Bria, Adam the Yetzirah, because we're talking about the structure of existence, so we call it Adam Kadmon, Adam the Bria, Adam the Yetzirah, Adam the Atzilus. It's the Gimel Minei Adam, I mentioned a number of times, the Drush Gimel Minei Adam from the Alter Rebbe. It's a very fundamental mimer that Tzemach Tzedek explains at length. It's printed now in Eretz Bolok, Eretz Inyanim, two different places. That's the expression used, Adam the Bria, the structure basically, because of the klolus. And then umishtalshel, that's the beginning of ishtalshel. B'tchilas ishtalshel. Umishtalshel v'nimshach. And this kav, and everything it creates is mishtalshel, continues to evolve. Mishtalshel, like from the word shalshelis, a chain, continues to travel, if you wish. Mishtalshel continues to unravel. What would be a good word for mishtalshel? I like evolve, but there may be another word, mishtalshel. It progresses, it continues the progression. The nimshach, and extends and is drawn. Madrega le madrega, from level to level, at safe maisa, till the safe maisa, meaning the end of the whole ishtalshlus, b'chinas Malchus da Atzilus. Malchus of Atzilus, now we're talking about Atzilus the Proteus. Lahaves ma'ayin liyesh. Where Malchus of Atzilus will then continue the process of creating Bria de Proteus, Bria Yetzir Asiya, and then we're getting to our world and our existence.
Mishtalshel is not progressive.
Spell this, one second. I always like to read it and spell it out, because when the Rabbeim, I don't know, for some reason I have a hergish, that when the Rabbeim describe Ishtalshelus and they go from beginning, you just feel that they're like describing that, like they're living there, and they're describing a real process that is happening right now and every moment. So whenever I read it, I don't know, I feel like it's like they're giving us a little taste of like someone who's going on the journey is telling us what the journey is like. So it's good to dwell a bit on these words. I know it says many times in my modim, Shtalshlus, Meresh Shtalshlus, Reish Kol Dargin, Seif Kol Dargin, from Atzilus, like he says here. But he's saying it's B'tchilas Shtalshlus, Adam the Bria, and then from there it continues the progression. So I just feel it's like the story I've told with Zalman Posner with the Frierdiker Rebbe's finger. Ever tell the story here? So the Rav Zalman Posner, Olav Shalom, was a shliach in Nashville for many years. So one sukkah, I was sitting with him in, if I bring him here in Crown Heights, he tells me when he was a bocher, something like 1946, 47, maybe a little younger, around then, I think 46, 47. Frierdiker Rebbe called him into Yechidus, called him in a sense, he wants to send him on a shlichus. I think Chicago, it was a temporary shlichus, not a permanent. Chicago, one of these cities in the country. He never went anywhere because he was never sent. So he was a little tentative. And the Frierdiker Rebbe sensed that he was like hesitant. Frierdiker Rebbe, of course, this was after the stroke and other problems. So it was difficult to understand the Frierdiker Rebbe clearly. And Rabbi Zalman Moshe said, Zevi grob de Welt is, am kenish verstehen what the Rebbe read, the Rebbe sagt. In other words, it's our grubkeit that unable to understand every word of the Rebbe. So he said the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he would speak, first of all, there was a secretary there that would help clarify and translate. And the Frierdiker Rebbe would use his hands to be more expressive. So watching his hands was very significant in helping understand. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, sensing his hesitation, says to him, as a neshama daf arab kuma lamata, when a soul has to come down below, will sie nicht gehen. She doesn't want to go. Why? Because eben is warm und lichtig, because above it's warm and bright, und unten is kalt und finster, and below is cold and dark. So why would a neshama want to go from a warm and illuminated bright place to a dark and cold world? So that Friedrich Rebbe said like this. He said, "Was Tutman?" He took his hand. "Was Tutman? What do you do?" So he says, "The Eibishter commands," and he took his finger from the top. He says, "It commands the neshama. Al korcha chatacha, you must go." And Friedrich Rebbe began to move this finger very slowly like this. He says, "You have to go from a very bright and warm place," and the finger was trembling a bit. He says. And he was watching, Zalman Posner tells me, he was watching this finger of the Friedrich Rebbe going down, 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 down like this. This command, you have to go down to a place. He goes all the way down like something like this. And he kept his finger there and said, down with it's dark and cold. And there the Friedrich Rebbe took his hands and made, "Und dorten darf man machen warm und lichtig." In this dark and cold place, you have to make it warm and bright. So Reb Zalman told me, that was it. He got the message. He told me that over the years, we all go through different challenges. He says times that you're down, melancholy, depressed, whatever the word is, despondent. You don't think things are working out. He always closes his eyes and he remembers the finger of the Friedrich Rebbe, and he feels like he's traveling with the finger, which gives him the koyach to go wherever he has to go to do the job. I just thought it was a very powerful imagery. So I'm saying when we read these lines and you hear the Rebbe describing the kav going down, it just reminded me of the story. That in a way you like travel with them, it gives you a strength that no matter where we are, you feel like the Rebbe is your guide and with you, and taking these highest levels and bringing it down all the way to where we are now. I just had this hergish, I felt I should share it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not progression. Mishtalshel is not progression.
I know, it's more, it's
goes down. It's
Mishtalshel is more like a chain, links in a chain that continue to...
That goes down.
It's evolve is a good word. Mishtalshel could be evolve. Yeah. Mishtalshel means it goes down. But you could say it, so it's a downward progression, a downward, not progression, a downward spiral, a downward...
Evolution?
Devolution, yeah, evolution. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's an exact, remember, the word Histalshlus comes from Shalshelis. Histalshlus. Like Histalshlus Hadvarim.
A lot of people use the word
Chain.
down.
A chain. But it's a downward chain. Yeah, fine. Good. I'm going to stop here before the parentheses because the parentheses is an interesting parenthesis. We'll learn it tomorrow. So, Akaponim, what we've established here is now he's moved after explaining Hayahu Shmei Bilvad. And explaining Baruch Kved Hashem Imkeim, he came back to where he began, that the Kav, rooted in Malchus of Ein Sof, is Ha'ara Va'ara, and therefore it's primarily the Ayin of the Yesh. I'll just say one thing about Shemo, because it doesn't look like he's explicitly going to answer it. My understanding, and this is from other Maimorim as well, Shemo, we described earlier, is not shaykh a name, and if you don't have anyone to call you by that name. Lamata, he said, the Shem is also Mechaber, Eris and Kalim, Neshama and Guf. But Lamaila, what's a Shemo? So obviously what he's saying here is that there's another element to Shemo that he didn't describe. It's not about a Zulas. It's the fact that God is manifesting in the name of Melech, but it's Hisnasus Atzmis. It's a Shemo Levad. Hayu Shemo Levad. So in other words, it's not as he's relating, but remember, if there's no Hisnasus Atzmis, there's no Hisnasus Ala'am. So though it can't call it a name, like we can call Melech, David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, or the Eibishter, Melech HaKol HaOretz. Like we said, we're Machtir the Melech, Rev Am Hadris Melech. That's all the Eibishter as it relates to Anam. But we learned that that's rooted in the Eibishter as he's Hisnasus Atzmis. But Hisnasus Atzmis is also Madrega. He never said it's not a Madrega. He just said it's Meyuchid, boy. It's one with him. It's how he is with himself, how the Melech is in his own inner chamber. So you can't call him Shmoi Melech is true, because he's not yet relating to another, but you can call it Shmoi because he has a name, meaning it's not his etzem. It's his etzem as it's manifests in Hisnasus Atzmis. That's Bapashtus how he's explaining it. I don't know if it's Bapashtus, but Kapanim, that's how I would explain it. So therefore, Shmoi doesn't always mean you need a Zulas, or even the potential of a Zulas. Shmoi could mean something that he is manifesting in some Madrega. The question is, what is who? So in the beginning, he said on top of page 1171, he said, who is Etzem Ha'er? Shmoi shu is Pashtus Ha'er. But then he asked the question.
Who is Etzem Ha'er or who is Atzmus?
No, who is Etzem Ha'er? He says on top of page, at the bottom of page 1170, 1171, explicitly, he says it befedish.
I think the key word is makar. The second line of the paragraph. Shmai hu kayach hamyuchad imay depina zu hi makar lamshachas hamachshava. Since it's a source to the machshava, it already has a shaychus to the zulas.
Yeah, I would probably add something more than that. Now I look back at the bottom of page 1170, he did say, Shmoi ha'atzmi. He said, Shmoi ha'atzmi. And there he did say, who is atzmusei, and Shmoi ha'atzmi, who is Shmoi Bilvad. But then the parenthesis, Baprotis hakolu b'chinas ha'oyer. So I would say, the reason it's Shmoi ha'atzmi, so it would mean, there's Shmoi nikra Shem Melech Alehem. That would be not Shmoi Atzmi. That's the Shem Melech of Ano Emlech. He's relating to an Am. But the root of his being a Melech is Malchusei Be'etzem. Remember, he doesn't just say he's an Etzem. He says he's a Melech Be'etzem. So you have a Shem Melech. However, it's a Shmoi Atzmi. It's only for himself. So it's the root, like you just said, it's Taka Mokir for the Shmoi, which would be Shem Melech no Emlech, but Shmoi Atzmi means how that Melech is still within the Etzem of Elokus. So it's Shmoi Ha'atzmi, it's the root of being a Melech, but it's not a Melech that you can call a name by another. It's essentially the beginning of it all, because if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to have the next level. So,
but who is the Atzmus?
Shem HaMelech Be'etzem, like something like that.
What is who?
That's a great explanation, because then he afterwards he explained about Melech Atzmi, and it said if you can be an Etzem Melech, you can have an Etzem name too. Makes sense.
Yeah, it makes it easier to understand the progression, because here's how it works. There's the Eibishter, there's not even a Melech Be'etzem. He's Bechlal L'gamri. You don't even use the word Hisnasus Atzmus. Or who? Etzem Ha'er. All it is what it is. Then the mere fact that he even relates to being...
You said Atzmus, not Etzem Ha'oyer.
Look, did you look at the bottom of page 1170? He says it explicitly. He says in general, it's Atzmus, who and Shmoi is Atzmus and Shmoi Etzem, and then he says, with Protis, it's Etzem Ha'oyer, who?
He says, Hainu
B'chinas
Musa Yisborech. That is saying.
Did you read the parentheses? Read on.
No, one line before. Who?
Read on. I'm telling you to read the parentheses. Ubepratis. Go on.
Okay, in parentheses he's saying it. But how you explaining it?
That's what I've been saying. Look inside. Anyway, let me get back to our thought here. So the fact is, there's a level that's beyond even being called Melech Be'etzem. He's altogether. Why? Even Hisnasus Atzmis, to say that God is the essence of reality. I told you earlier that that's also a manifestation. On Atzmus, you don't speak such aces. Atzmus does not need to be called that he's completely unique. That's already some experience. So Hisnasus Atzmis is already also a level of Shmoya Atzmi. That's what it appears from this. Anyway, let's stop here. We'll talk more tomorrow.
Yeah, but how are you explaining it? According to your explanation now, actually, there was no, not Oyer Atzmi, even also not. Actually,
only touched the way that Rebbe Rashab typed actually Nivra Elam, he typed it actually Nivra Machshava Dano Emlech. That's how he's typing here.
Okay.
At the bottom of the page, he said, before that, Machshava no Emlech, he had Hoyahu Shmei Bilvad. No, the Nizga Shmei Levade is Shmei Bilvad, and Heidei Vezive is Machshava No Emlech, that's Nivra Elam. So Nivra Elam here doesn't just mean the world, it means a lakuz that relates to the world.